I never thought I'd hear those words screamed at me in my own childhood home. Not like that, not with so much anger that my hands started shaking before my brain could even catch up. One moment I was standing in the hallway I grew up in, and the next, my stepmom was pointing at the door, her face red, her voice echoing through the walls as she yelled, "Get out of my house!" Before I tell you what happened next, you need to understand how I got there. My name is Sarah, and I was 32 years old when this happened. I had moved out years ago, built my own quiet life, my own routines, my own sense of peace. I worked as a project manager for a small construction firm, lived in a rented apartment across town, and kept my distance from family drama as much as I could. After my mom died when I was 14, home never felt the same. My dad remarried less than 2 years later, and from the start, Linda made it clear that I was a reminder she didn't want around. At first, it was subtle, little comments about how much space I took up, how expensive teenagers were, how hard it must have been for my dad to raise me alone before she came along. I learned to stay quiet, to clean up after myself, to avoid being in the same room as her when I could. My dad noticed some of it, I think, but he always smoothed things over, telling me she just needed time, that blending families was hard. I believed him because I wanted to. I wanted my dad to be happy, and I didn't want to be the problem. When I turned 18, I left for college and rarely came back. Visits were polite but cold. Linda treated me like a guest who overstayed her welcome, and I learned to keep my visits short. My dad and I stayed close in our own way, phone calls once a week, lunches when we could manage them without Linda around. But then, 2 years ago, everything shifted again. My dad got sick. It started with small things, fatigue, missed appointments, confusion he laughed off. By the time doctors took it seriously, it was already too late. Those last months were brutal. I visited the house more often, helped with appointments, medications, meals. Linda tolerated me then, but there was always an edge, a sense that she was keeping score. When my dad passed away, I felt like the ground disappeared under my feet. Grief does strange things to time. Days blurred together, and the house felt heavy, full of memories that hurt to touch. After the funeral, Linda barely spoke to me. A week later, she asked me to come by to talk about some things. I thought she meant my dad's belongings, maybe photos or paperwork. I walked into the living room where we'd once put up a Christmas tree together, and she didn't even offer me a seat. She stood there with her arms crossed, eyes hard, and told me it was time to move on. She said the house was hers now, that my presence was upsetting, and that I needed to stop clinging to the past. I tried to stay calm. I told her I just wanted a few of my dad's things, his watch, some letters, maybe his old toolbox from the garage. That's when she snapped. Her voice rose so fast it shocked me. She screamed that I was ungrateful, that I'd already taken enough from her life. And then she shouted those words that still ring in my ears, "Get out of my house!" She marched to the front door, flung it open, and stood there waiting, daring me to argue. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't get enough air. I looked around that living room one last time, the couch my dad fell asleep on every night, the gent in the wall when I'd crash my bike at 12, and something inside me went very still. I picked up my bag and walked out without another word. As the door slammed behind me, I sat in my car and cried until my head hurt. Part of me felt like that scared 14-year-old again, pushed aside, unwanted. But underneath the grief and shock, there was something else growing quietly. A memory I hadn't thought about in years. A conversation with my dad, whispered late one night, about making sure you're always taken care of. At the time, I hadn't fully understood what he meant. Sitting there, in the driveway, wiping tears from my face, I realized Linda had no idea what she'd just done. And she definitely had no idea what that house really was. For the first few days after that, I didn't do anything dramatic. I went back to my apartment, went to work, answered emails, and tried to function like a normal human being. But inside, my emotions were all over the place. I felt hurt, angry, and strangely calm all at once. Grief has a way of sharpening old memories, and the more I replayed that moment at the door, the clearer one memory became. My dad, sitting at the kitchen table years ago, sliding a folder toward me and telling me to keep it somewhere safe. At the time, I was 25, barely paying attention, more focused on my job and my own life. He'd told me he'd put the house in my name years earlier, after my mom died. He said it was his way of making sure I'd always have a home no matter what happened. I remembered laughing, telling him not to be dramatic, and he'd smiled in that quiet way of his and said, "Promise me you won't lose those papers." I took them away and honestly hadn't thought about them since. That night, I dug through the old box in my closet. There it was, the deed, my name, dated and signed, worth more than I'd ever imagined back then. I sat on the floor holding those papers, my hands steady, my heart racing. Linda had been living in that house for years, believing it was hers by default. My dad had never told her. He'd trusted me to handle it when the time came. I realized then that my grief had turned into something else entirely. Determination. I didn't rush back to the house. I called a lawyer instead. I needed to be sure, and I needed to be smart. Over coffee in a quiet office, I laid everything out. The yelling, the eviction, the deed. He looked at the papers, nodded slowly, and confirmed what I already knew. Legally, the house was mine. Linda had no claim to it beyond living there. Hearing it out loud was grounding. It turned my emotions into something solid, something I could act on. Over the next 2 weeks, Linda left me voicemails. At first, they were cold, telling me to come get my things and stop causing trouble. Then they turned sharp, accusing me of stealing from her, of disrespecting my father's memory. I didn't respond. Silence can be powerful when used carefully. Instead, I followed my lawyer's advice. We sent a formal notice, calm and factual, stating ownership and requesting a meeting to discuss next steps. No threats, no anger, just truth. The day of the meeting, my stomach was in knots, not because I doubted the outcome, but because confronting someone who spent years pushing you aside brings up old wounds. We met at the house. Walking back up that driveway felt surreal. Linda opened the door with a tight smile that vanished the moment she saw my lawyer beside me. She tried to argue right away, insisting this was all a mistake, that my dad would never do this to her. Her voice shook, but there was still arrogance there, still certainty. Inside, the house felt smaller than I remembered. We sat at the dining table, and my lawyer calmly laid out the documents. Linda's hands trembled as she flipped through them. She kept saying my dad must have changed his mind, that there had to be something else, some newer well. But there wasn't. The room went quiet in a way that made my ears ring. For the first time since I'd known her, Linda looked unsure, afraid even. She asked me why I hadn't said anything sooner. I told her the truth. I hadn't needed to. I trusted my dad's plan, and I hadn't wanted to fight. But the moment she screamed at me to get out, something shifted. I realized I didn't owe her my silence anymore. She started crying then, real tears this time, talking about how she'd lived there for years, how it was her home too. I listened, but I didn't back down. The meeting ended without a resolution. Linda needed time, she said, time to process. As I walked out, I knew this wasn't over yet, but I also knew I wasn't powerless anymore. The house, the thing she'd used to control and dismiss me, was no longer a weapon against me. It was the truth waiting to be acknowledged, and soon she would have no choice but to face it. A month later, everything came to a head. Linda tried one last move, filing a claim to delay things, hoping time would work in her favor. It didn't. The law is patient, but it's also precise. When the final meeting was scheduled, I felt surprisingly calm. I wasn't there to gloat or humiliate her. I just wanted closure. I wanted my dad's wishes respected, and I wanted my own sense of self back. This time, Linda barely spoke. The judge reviewed the documents, asked a few questions, and confirmed what had already been clear from the start. Ownership was mine. Linda was given time to make arrangements, but the decision was final. When it was over, she didn't look at me. She gathered her bag and left the room without a word. Watching her walk away, I didn't feel triumph. I felt release. Years of feeling small, unwanted, and dismissed finally loosened their grip on me. When I returned to the house alone a few weeks later, it felt different, quieter, like it was waiting. I walked through each room slowly, touching the walls, opening windows, letting light in. I kept some of my dad's things exactly where they were: his chair, his tools, his notes tucked into drawers. I donated what I didn't need and made the space my own, not out of spite, but out of respect for the life that had shaped me. Linda moved out and out of my life. We haven't spoken since. Sometimes I wonder if she ever truly understood why my dad did what he did, but that's no longer my burden. What matters is that I finally learned something important about myself. I learned that staying quiet isn't the same as being kind, and that standing up for yourself doesn't make you cruel, it makes you honest. Looking back, that moment at the door changed everything. When she screamed at me to get out, she thought she was taking something from me. In reality, she pushed me into claiming what was already mine. Not just the house, but my voice, my confidence, and my sense of worth. And now, every time I unlock that front door, I'm reminded that power doesn't always come from yelling the loudest. Sometimes it comes from knowing the truth and waiting for the right moment to let it speak.